Richard pulled into Caleb's apartment complex and found a parking spot close to Caleb's spot. He pulled in and left the car running. Caleb took a deep breath and let it out. "Fun day," he said. "Indeed, it was a pretty eventful day," Richard said. The hour was late. The two had spent the whole day in New York together. Richard was exhausted. "I feel like now would be one of those perfect moments to say that cliché line, 'Well, I've had enough excitement for one day,'" Richard said, laughing lightly. Caleb laughed as well. "Usually that's in reference to several unfortunate things happening throughout one day," he said. "Oh," Richard shrugged. "Well, I won't say it then." The two sat in the idle car for several seconds, not saying a word. Richard was ready to go straight to bed. Caleb seemed to be thinking something. Richard waited for him to speak. "Days like today, in comparison to the rest of my week, or month for that matter, always make me feel sad. I hate this fucking place, man," he said finally. Richard laughed at that. "I hear you, man. Well, when I move, you know you can visit as often as you want. Maybe we'll even come up with something to film up there." "Yeah, that's true. First we have to finish the one we're working on. We're getting together tomorrow, right?" Caleb asked. "Yep. And we have 3 more weeks until I ship out, so I'm feeling pretty confident about it," Richard said. He took a moment, reflecting on the day, and then spoke again. "Fuck, I got lucky. My parents were literally breathing down my neck this whole summer because they were waiting for me to transfer to a 4-year. Fucking Drexel denied me, NYU. God damn, this is just like a huge weight off my chest," he sighed, then added, "I'm sorry, man." "Why are you apologizing?" Caleb asked. "I'm complaining about shit that I don't have to think about anymore. I just feel fucking happy, that's all. I don't even have an associate's degree and my parents have no fucking clue." "I'm sorry, I'm going to stop talking," Richard said and gave a nervous laugh. "You can talk whenever you want, man. That's what I'm here for," Caleb said with a smile. His hand went to the car door. He was preparing to leave. "Can I ask you something?" "It's going to sound weird," Richard said somewhat timidly. "What's up?" Caleb asked. "When we were at orientation, I was talking to that guy Johnny, the British guy. You had this weird look on your face, like you were thinking something." Caleb laughed out loud and gave a huge smile. "Oh, that," he said. "I was just watching the way you interact with strangers. You're funny when you want to be, but you aren't like that all the time. People have to approach you in order to get to know you, not the other way around. I just found it interesting, that's all. I think you're going to have a lot of fun in New York." "Don't come back," Caleb said jokingly. Richard smiled. "Thanks, man. I think so too." "All right, well, I'm going to go inside and go to sleep now," Caleb said. He opened the car door and stepped out. "Sounds good to me, man," Richard said. Caleb held onto the car door. Richard waited for him to close it before he drove off. "What time am I seeing you again tomorrow?" Caleb asked. "I'll call you when I wake up." That's probably going to be around 11, Rich said. Caleb held onto the door. He was thinking of something to say. "You gonna shave?" Caleb asked, grinning. Rich smiled and scratched at his facial hair. "Probably." "Later, man," Caleb said and shut the door. Richard watched him walk into his apartment. He slowly pulled out of the parking space and turned out onto the road. He smiled at the thought going through his head. "Caleb takes a long-ass time to leave," he laughed to himself. It was a curious trait about the seemingly almost perfect guy. Interesting to say the least, Richard thought in the solace of his own car. He pulled up to his house not long after leaving Caleb's. He turned off the car and sat still for a minute. It was 11:15. He closed his eyes and yawned. He then reached in the back of the car and collected the papers and folders he had acquired from the orientation and stuffed them all in his book bag. Richard opened the door of his car, thinking only of his bed and pillow, and in that moment, his cell rang. Richard let out an agonized sigh and looked to see who it was. Shaun Hunt. He was probably calling to ask about the orientation, if he had remembered it was today, Richard thought to himself. He contemplated ignoring it. He could tell him about the experience tomorrow. A pang of guilt went through him. Shaun had gone with him to New York when he asked. He was calling now to check up on him. The least Richard could do was show him some gratitude. With that thought in mind, he answered. "Richie boy! Thank God you fucking answered. I fucked up, man. I fucked up big time," Shaun exclaimed into the phone. He sounded panicked, worried. "What the fuck happened?" Richard asked, startled. Ugh. Can I tell you? Like, what are you doing right now? Are you busy? I don't know who else to call, man. Fuck, I fucked up," Shaun yelled. Richard could hear through the phone the sound of Shaun hitting something repeatedly. "What happened, man?" Richard asked urgently. His once droopy eyes were now wide awake. Shaun moaned into the phone. "I was fucking propositioned, man. This fucking girl fucking just propositioned me," Shaun said. His voice sounded pleading. "Wait, what?" Richard asked, confused. "This fucking girl at work just tried to fuck me." Big time, man, and it was right in front of Sanem. Oh my god, I'm such an idiot. Shaun screamed and continued pounding at whatever it was he was hitting. Richard laughed. He felt stupid. Stupid for being worried for Shaun, and even stupider to think that Shaun might have called to ask about the orientation. Even still, Richard had answered the phone. He was now obligated to hear the entire story. He felt lighter. He went from one obligation to another in the course of mere seconds. In the first circumstance, Richard was prepared to talk about his day, though he had no interest in doing so whatsoever. He was going to talk about it enough to his parents. The second obligation Richard accepted much more willingly. He liked Shaun's stories. They always ended up with him laughing. So he closed the car door, which had been open since Shaun had called, and relaxed back into his seat. "So tell me what happened," Richard said. "Okay, all right. I'm going to start from the beginning and then try to calm down. There's this new girl at work. She started like a week or two ago. A couple of days ago, I was stuck at the break table talking to her, and she asked me a shitload of questions concerning my dating affairs, whether I had a girlfriend, if I was seeing anyone, blah, blah, blah. She fucking asked me where I lived, and I told her all this shit. I told her I was interested in seeing someone at the diner, but that I didn't know if it was going to work out. I said that for Sanem's benefit because she doesn't want people to know we're dating, which is another story, mind you. So anyway, that little thing happens and I forget about it until tonight when she comes in on her day off. Wait, let me give you a brief description of her. That's kind of important." Shaun took a breath. He had a tendency to speed up his dialogue whenever he told a story. He is also a big fan of cramming in as many details as he could. Richard didn't mind it too much, though sometimes it annoyed him. He continued in the same speedy manner. "Okay, so this girl is 27, short, and has 2 kids, both of them mixed from different fathers, and she has a voice that's extremely high-pitched," Shaun said. "So is she hot?" Richard asked. Not really. I mean, she was a girl that I would fuck if I was single, but I'm not single." "Okay, anyway, let me continue. So she comes in today in plain clothes, shorts, and a halter top. None of the female servers like her. They hate her voice and shit. And I'm over at the far end of the diner rolling silverware, just minding my own fucking business. And she decides to walk on over and sit down at the countertop in front of me. Well, slightly to the right of me, to be exact." Richard laughed. Fucking details, he thought. Shaun went on. "So she starts chatting me up about the girl I was trying to date here, and she asked me to point her out, and I tell her I'm too embarrassed to. Just some bullshit so I don't have to give that it's Sanem. Okay, so here's where it gets fucking horrible. Sanem comes over to us and starts rolling silverware on my left side, and I'm just thinking that this is not a good situation for me, and it doesn't get better. The whore says to me that I should forget about the girl that I want today and come hang out with her. She proceeded to invite me out to the bar, and she was like, I'm actually a really good wingman. I could bring you to bars and introduce you to girls. And Sanem is just standing next to me with her head down, just listening to the whole thing. My heart is beating like just super fucking fast, and I have no fucking clue as to what to say. So she keeps on going. At this point, Sanem walks away to attend the table. The whore says to me, "You haven't asked me what I would get out of hooking you up." And I look at her for a second, my entire body just brimming with curiosity, and I ask her what she would get out of it. This is where it happens, Richie boy. She says to me, "The nights that you score and I help you take a girl home, I get to come and watch. And the nights that you don't take a girl home, you get to fuck me as a consolation prize." Richard's jaw dropped open. The phone was silent for only a heartbeat. Richard took it away from his ear and began howling with laughter. He didn't know what other response to make at such a story. The laughter came easy to him. He took a couple of seconds to steady his breathing and put the phone back to his ear. "That is fucking ridiculous," Richard said, emphasizing ridiculous. Shaun's voice sounded tired now. He had hit the peak of his story and was summing the rest up. "Yeah, I know." His speaking had slowed down considerably. "So long story short is, she says that, Sanem comes back and rolls some silverware. The whore asked for my number right in front of Sanem, and the worst part is I fucking gave it to her, Richie. I gave it to her," he said. "You fucking gave it to her?" Richard said, laughing again. "Yeah, I'm a fucking idiot. I gave her my number right in front of Sanem." "Are you planning on fucking her?" Richard asked. Shaun sounded hurt. "I can't, Rich. I'm dating Sanem. Fucking legs a couple weeks ago was borderline enough." "Well, shit, man. Sounds like you fucked up big time," Richard said. "Yeah, I know. Do you think I can recover, Richie? When the whore left, I walked up to Sanem and told her I had no intention of calling her or returning her text messages. She looked like she believed me, but at the same time, she looked fucking pissed," Shaun said. "Aw, man, that sucks, buddy. I'm sure you'll be fine, though. You can survive this." Richard tried to sound encouraging, though as always, Shaun's problems always seemed strangely remote to him. Richard wasn't very knowledgeable in the relationship department. "You're just saying that," Shaun said. He knew Richard well. Then he added, "But I'm glad you are. I'm glad I could talk to you. I fucked her, by the way. Sanem." Again, Richard's jaw dropped. Already? He asked, shocked. Now it was Shaun's turn to laugh. Yeah, I was pretty surprised as well. I had only kissed her like 2 weeks ago. Richard, she was a fucking virgin. Richard shook his head in disbelief. Fucking ridiculous, man. That is some ridic shit. Yeah, I know. I was thinking I was going to have to hold off for like a couple months. I was preparing myself for it. Shaun laughed with relief. How was it? Richard asked. Richard could almost see Shaun shrug. It was sex, you know. It was her first time, so it wasn't anything spectacular. She kind of just laid there. It was really dope, though, because the sexual urge was all pent up. She was in my ear the whole time saying no, but she kept pushing me deeper inside her. She didn't fucking tell me until after I did it that she was a virgin, Shaun said. That's pretty funny, Richard said. Yeah, I was pretty annoyed. And then she was all confused that she didn't bleed because a girl's supposed to bleed after her cherries popped and whatnot. So she thought that I didn't go in far enough. But let me tell you, Richie, I was in there. I was in there big time. I was just kind enough not to break any bones when I entered her. I was extremely delicate, which is why she most likely didn't bleed. I don't know. I'm just theorizing. I'm not a scientist, Shaun said jokingly. Fuck. Sounds like a pretty interesting couple of days, Richard said. You can say that again. I'm supposed to see her again tonight. She probably wants a round 2. Well, it's a round 3 to be exact, since I fucked her again this morning, just to make sure she knew that she wasn't a virgin no more, Shaun said, laughing to himself. Richard laughed along with him. You're a fucking fiend, he said. There was a momentary pause in the conversation, and that time Rich hesitated telling him about orientation. The day's events had made Shaun forget about it, but Rich knew he would still care to find out. He decided against it. He'll ask me in the future, he thought. Anyway, I feel better now. I got that off my chest, Shaun said with a sigh. I'm glad, buddy, Richard said with a smile. I'm going to go fuck this Persian bitch again, Shaun said jokingly. Richard laughed. Have fun. Will do. Love you, Richie. Love you too, buddy. Richard hung up the phone. Shaun. Shaun sat in his car in the diner's parking lot. He turned around and looked back at the place. Sanem was outside waiting for a ride with a friend coworker. Shaun winced. He wondered if they had heard him yelling into the phone. His heart sped up. He felt like an idiot. He contemplated walking over to her and asking her what time he should expect her that evening. Then again, he couldn't do that in front of Yasmin because she didn't know about the two of them. He grit his teeth. The fight or flight reflex in his brain kicked in and he chose flight. He turned the car on and sped home. He walked into the house and up the 2 flights of stairs that brought him to his room, his place. He completely cleaned his whole floor in anticipation of Sanem's first coming. The living space that was outside of his small bedroom was nice and open. He walked to the far corner of that room and sat down in an armchair. He breathed slowly and contemplated. The wine is downstairs in the fridge, he reminded himself. That thought gave him small excitement. He was looking forward to tonight. He looked at the freshly vacuumed green carpet. Only a month ago it had been covered with trash bags of clothes that had been there since he and his brother moved into the place. That was over 7 months ago. Now the clothes were tucked semi-neatly away in the various dressers that had been left for use by the landlord. He looked at the floor and planned out his evening. He walked over to the dresser against the far wall and sat down, putting his back against it. He pictured the wine glass staying on his left side. He made a mental note to keep it far enough out of reach as to not spill it mistakenly. He opened his legs and spread them out in a V. She'll sit in between them, he thought. He looked down at his crotch, and that's where she'll put her wine glass. His heart sped up from the anticipation. He didn't understand why he took so much pleasure out of these moments, but he did. Sometimes he asked himself if the planning was more satisfying than the actual execution. In the end, he understood that he could not have one without the other. Should I mention what happened today? Shaun asked himself aloud. If she brings it up, he answered internally. He put his head up against the dresser and waited. He waited for her text. He thought about what it would say. I'm ready, he guessed. Shaun closed his eyes and began to envision the conversations they would have as they drank their wine. He thought about the facial expressions he would use as he described something that was on his mind. He thought about the smile he would have on his face as he opened the wine bottle. He envisioned the first kiss of the night, slow and controlled. He knew the number of seconds she would be in the room before they would have sex. He knew that he didn't have to have sex. He knew that the sex would seemingly come reluctant of his own free will, that he would seem in pain as he pulled her pants off. He thought about his face at that moment, how he would look up at her from below her pelvic bone, and how she would see the amount of uncontrollable desire in his eyes. Shaun groaned at the anticipation. He was ready. This room was his stage, and he was ready for his audience. If only she would hurry up, Shaun thought. He considered going to the spot not far from her house and waiting there for her text. He decided against that. He didn't want to seem too eager. So he waited in agony and looked at the spots on the floor where Sanem's bare back would lay. He waited and thought of the moans that would escape her mouth while he satisfied himself with her. He waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. Shaun had developed patience a long time ago. He could wait all night for his chance to perform. All in all, 45 minutes passed by the time Shaun received the text he was waiting for. "I'm ready," the text read. Shaun smiled and bolted down the stairs and out the house. It was midnight. He was at her house in another 10 minutes. He parked in the apartment complex, a little bit down from where she lived at her behest. Sanem wanted to keep their relationship a secret from everyone and their mother. Shaun didn't mind much, but he predicted having problems with it in the future. For now, he was happy to oblige. He saw her small figure come out from under a large streetlight. Her body still surprised him every time he saw her out of the diner's boxy uniform. She walked slowly. Her phone lit her face blue as she texted some unknown friend. Shaun pulled out from his temporary parking spot and met her en route. She stepped into the car saying "hey" in a sweet Persian accent. She smelled good, like she always did. Her hair was down. He noticed the care she had put into applying her makeup and choosing her wardrobe. Shaun was flattered. He hoped she always cared about how she looked in front of him. He crossed his fingers in his head. "Hey," he said back. He started driving home. "What's up?" Sanem asked. Her eyes darted back down to her phone as she quickly finished her text conversation and stuffed her phone away in her purse. "Not much," she said. "I'm actually kind of impressed by you. I was expecting the text to around 12:30. You shaved off 30 minutes. Sanem looked at him and smiled. She rolled her eyes. "Well, next time I'll take longer if you like," she said. Shaun smiled back at her. "No, I want you to get to me as quickly as possible," he said sincerely. "Though, if I had to wait for anyone, I'd have it be you every time." "Is that so?" Sanem asked. Shaun nodded his head in affirmation and said definitely. "So are you excited to drink the wine?" Sanem asked. "Yeah, I feel like I'm finally of the age where I can appreciate it. I've always wondered what the big deal was, so I'm glad we have a whole bottle to ourselves," Shaun said. "You'll like it. Pinot Noir is good." "You said it's sweet, right?" Shaun asked. Sanem nodded her head. "It's sweeter than other red wines. You don't want to drink a Merlot or something like that. I hate it." "You're the boss," Shaun said. She reached over to him and pinched his cheek. "You know I hate it when you call me the boss," Sanem said. Shaun swatted at her hand and laughed. "What's wrong with you being my boss? You don't want me to work for you?" Shaun asked her jokingly. "Women are not supposed to be the boss of their man," Sanem said. Shaun raised his eyebrows and smiled proudly. "You're calling me your man?" "Of course you're my man," she said matter-of-factly. "So what? Does that mean I'm supposed to be the boss of you?" Shaun asked, smirking. Sanem chewed on that question. Kind of. In certain situations you're supposed to be the boss. Like you're the one who's supposed to put his foot down. Like when I'm doing something that you don't like. The man is supposed to just put a stop to it." She slapped her hands together as if she were squashing a bug. Shaun laughed at the notion and looked at her. She was adorable. The Persian accent mixed with the level of sexual innocence she would soon lose in the coming months made her completely irresistible. He picked on her. "What if I don't have a problem with anything you do? What if I love everything about you?" "What is a man supposed to do then?" Shaun asked with a smirk. She glared over at him. "Don't be smart." She reached over to try another pinch at Shaun's cheek. Shaun dodged it this time. "You'll find something wrong with me, I promise." She gave a big fake smile. Shaun pulled up to his house and parked on the side of the road. The two got out and walked up the wooden stairs to his door. He held on to her as she stepped onto the wobbly plank that Legs had notified him about months ago. He unlocked the door and held it open for her. Dick wasn't home, much to Shaun's dismay. His brother had been telling him for months that there was no way Shaun could ever get Sanem to step foot into their house. He had told Shaun that if he ever had sex with her, he would personally walk up to him, shake his hand, and tell him that he was proud of him. He hadn't seen Dick since yesterday. He had yet to tell him the news. Not that it mattered anymore. After the previous night's success, the sex was almost trivial to him. It was something that was simply on the itinerary for the evening, but was not necessarily the main event. He thought how lucky she was as they walked upstairs and headed into the kitchen. Every time Shaun had sex with her for the next month or so, it would be a better, more significant experience for her more than for him. Tonight would be her third time having a penis enter her. The thought made Shaun dizzy. He had been having sex for 6 years. Incredible, he thought, and she chose me to be her first. He opened the fridge and pulled out the wine. "Why don't you head upstairs? I'll be right up with the glasses," Shaun said. Sanem obeyed and left the kitchen. Shaun gathered the wine bottle in one hand and the 2 wine glasses in the other. He put the wine opener in his mouth and headed upstairs. Sanem was waiting for him in his room. She was sitting quite erectly on the edge of his bed. Her legs lay on top of one another in a ladylike fashion. Her eyes were cast downward as she texted away on her phone, her face serene. Shaun stared at her from the top of the stairs. He was in awe of her. Her shoes were placed at a corner of the room. He watched her gorgeous feet as they dangled off of his bed, bobbing slightly to a rhythm that was playing through her head. Shaun had never had a girl like this before. He had never thought that he would either. Yet there she was, looking completely at ease. He set the wine and its accessories down on the dresser and walked into his room. He put himself in front of her and placed his right hand on the back of her head. She stopped texting and looked up at him, her face looking ever so vulnerable. The position was empowering. He thought of what he would proceed to do to this girl if she was not who she was. If she were legs, for instance. He clutched at her hair tightly and pulled back, tilting her head upwards, making her face him full on. He felt his pants begin to stiffen. Memories began flushing into his head. A wet mouth, soft lips, tears in the mist of pleasure. Sanem's face morphed into Jess's right before his eyes, but only for a heartbeat. Sanem looked up at him and waited, unquestioning. He let go of her and walked away. He walked into the other room and sat in the corner armchair. He shut his eyes tight and tried to clear his mind. "Fuck," he said to himself. "Fuck, that was fucking weird." Sanem left the bedroom and came to him looking confused. "What's wrong?" she asked him, concerned. "Nothing. I just want to start drinking the wine before I get sidetracked," he said, with a smile. He got up and took 2 short strides to where the wine was resting. It was cold to touch. He focused on opening the bottle and tried to calm himself. "Are we drinking in here or in your room?" Sanem asked. Her accent brought him back to reality. He remembered who she was and who he was dealing with. Sanem, he thought. The girl that he was falling for. He poured the wine into the 2 glasses and handed one to her. "I want to be in here tonight. It's too gloomy in my room sometimes. It's too small. I feel closed in," Shaun said. She accepted the wine glass and took a short sip. "Why don't you move the bed in here? You'll have more space," Sanem suggested. "Maybe. I'll consider that." Shaun sat down onto the floor, Indian style. He grabbed Sanem's wrist and pulled her down slowly. She giggled as she complied. "So," she said, sitting down and getting comfortable. "So," Shaun repeated with a smile. "So 9 months later, and here we are." I'm still kind of in shock. "I don't think we should count 9 months. I didn't really know you that well when you first started." "I knew you. I knew you before I even got hired," Shaun said. Sanem smiled over the rim of her wine glass. "So you tell me." "I still don't remember you in any of my classes." "That's okay. I won't hold it against you," Shaun said quietly. He smiled to himself. He was taking back control. He was playing the role that he had chosen for the night, the quiet seducer. We must stay in order. He wondered how weird people would think he was if they could hear what went on in his head. We should clink glasses, right?" he asked. Sanem laughed and hit his glass with hers. "To last night," Shaun said with a smile. Sanem made a face as if she did not want to think about what happened the night before. Still, she said, "To last night." "Do you want to talk about it?" Shaun asked. "What is there to talk about? I'm just confused why I didn't bleed," Sanem said. Shaun shrugged. "Who knows? I just wish you had told me before, Sanem." "What would you have done differently? Would you still have done it?" Sanem asked, intrigued. "No," Shaun said simply. "I would have waited. I thought your last boyfriend took it, which is why I did what I did yesterday." She hummed to herself and looked at Shaun quizzically. She took another sip of wine. "I knew you'd come back tonight," Shaun said with a brief moment of silence. He began scooting over to the dresser, positioning himself as he had imagined earlier. His back rested against the hard wood, and his legs slowly opening into a V. "Oh yeah? Even after you fucked up at the diner today?" Sanem asked with a devilish grin. Shaun chuckled to himself. She had played that card too late. He was already in control of the situation. He reached over and grabbed her hips, pulling her closely to him. Her knees met his outstretched shins. Their faces stood a foot across from each other. His wine was slightly out of reach on his left side. He grabbed Sanem's glass and placed it on the floor in the small space between them. He had taken control. Everything that happened within his enclosed space did not happen without his say-so. Wine did not spill unless Shaun intended for it to spill. There would be no phone calls to either person's phone for the entirety that he had had her there. Insects dared not intrude. Car accidents and fires happened on other blocks away from him. Shaun looked at Sanem with a handsome grin. "Let's not talk about that," he said. She squinted her eyes at him but said nothing further. Instead, she asked a question. "How did you know I would come back for you tonight?" she said. "Curiosity." "You've probably been thinking about it all day, haven't you?" Shaun asked with a smile. She said nothing, only a childish glare, an expression that admitted defeat. "I really envy you. Every time you have sex, it's going to be a new experience for you. It's going to be interesting to watch what you become. And you happen to pick the perfect partner," Shaun said. "That's not why I picked you, Shaun. I didn't pick you so you could teach me how to have sex," Sanem said. Jury's still out on that, Shaun thought. "Why did you pick me, Sanem?" he asked. "I don't know. I didn't think it would ever get this far. I never thought that we were going to have sex, to be honest with you. But after a while, I realized that there was no way I was going to deny you. I knew that if I didn't give you what you wanted, you would just leave and find someone else. And I just didn't want that to happen," Sanem said. That interested Shaun. He looked at her curiously. "Are you telling me that you gave me sex in order to keep me with you?" The idea turned him on. "No," she said quickly. "I wanted to have sex with you last night. If I didn't want to, I wouldn't have let you do it. I would have pushed you off." Shaun continued looking at her, considering whether or not to press the issue further. He decided against it. He didn't really care why she decided to give it up so early, though he had his suspicions. "I have a question for you now," Sanem said with a small smile. "Yes," Shaun said politely. "What was it like for you?" Sanem asked timidly. Bless her heart. Shaun looked at her and gave her his warmest, most assuring smile. "If ever I have a problem with the way we're having sex, I promise you'll be the first one to know," Shaun said sincerely. That seemed to put her at ease. She took another sip of wine and leaned in closer. She was intending to kiss him. Not yet, Shaun thought. He kissed two of his fingers and laid them on her lips. He leaned forward and kissed her cheek. Shaun wanted to savor this moment as much as he could. The things he felt in that small space of breath and time were always his happiest. That connection he felt with another person, an admirer, a desirer, someone who wanted him more than they wanted anyone else in the world. And Shaun knew to savor it. He knew that the feeling he and Sanem shared at that particular moment could never be recreated later down the line. He knew this was the infatuation stage. He knew that the feelings would not last. What Shaun wasn't sure of was how the relationship would meet its end. But he was positive there was an end. "I like you," Shaun said. "Yeah?" Sanem asked with a smile. "What do you like about me?" Shaun laughed at himself. He had set himself up for that one. He hated romantic cliches more than regular ones. Any line that could be heard in 5 different movies he had no interest in hearing in real life. He forgave her, though. She was not aware. Still, he had to punish her by not giving her the answer that she wanted. "Your ass," Shaun said with a smile. He achieved the right level of disappointment that displayed across Sanem's face. She wrinkled her nose and bared her teeth. "You weren't supposed to say that," she said, hitting his knee. "I wasn't?" Shaun asked, feigning ignorance. Sanem laughed and glared at him. He took her by the face and kissed her once, slowly, controlled. Her eyes were closed. He pulled away from her and watched as her lips searched for more. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "This is the moment where girls fall in love with me," Shaun told himself. This fucking moment. He hoped it was true. He hated the thought of doing all that work for nothing. He took pride in his work. Sometimes he worried that the females did not care as much as he did about the steps he took to be Prince Charming, Don Juan, and Edward Cullen all at the same time. Yet he took solace in the fact that he was doing it as much for him as for them. Shaun was an actor, and he was frequently out of work. This is what he did to compensate. "You like my accent," she whispered softly. Shaun nodded in agreement. "Yes, I do. I do like your accent." His voice met her volume level. Now the fun part, Shaun thought. He stood up abruptly and walked across the room. He kept his back to her and placed his head on the far wall, against the closet door. "Shaun," she said nervously. Shaun turned around and looked at her. "Take your pants off," he said with a small smile. The smile was for her, so she still felt safe. "Why?" Sanem asked with a smile of her own. Because I want you to, Shaun said. Take your shirt off, Sanem demanded. Shaun obliged happily. He threw off his V-neck t-shirt in less than a second. He stood before her shirtless. His abs were flexed. He wished he could switch places with her at that moment. It would ruin the moment if he happened to look down at the wonder he had turned his body into. He thought of that scene with Ryan Gosling in Crazy Stupid Love. Fuck him. He watched her look at him. Her eyes did nothing to betray what she was thinking. This annoyed Shaun. Though he was sure she could only be thinking the same things other females had often said out loud, the fact that her eyes nor her mouth did not say so bothered him. She's always been reserved, Shaun thought. He stopped himself from using the word that described her more clearly in his head. Bitch. He decided to admire the trait. Anything that Sanem did that was unlike other girls, he chose to look at positively. It made the accomplishment of having her and keeping her that much greater. Of course, those desires fell by the wayside in that particular moment. They were replaced by another one, the desire to fuck her. Take your pants off, he repeated again. Shaun pulled into a parking spot and looked at the time. 2 o'clock already. He groaned. He had work in 3 hours. He texted Caleb. I'm here, it said. He sat back in his car and waited. His phone began vibrating. It was his mother. He was wary of answering. She had a tendency to talk longer than was necessary over the phone. He didn't want to get stuck in the middle of a conversation with her and then juggle Caleb getting into the car. He shrugged. He was confident he could manage. Hi, Mommy, Shaun said cheerfully as he answered the phone. Hi, Shaun, how are you? His mother's melodic voice sang across the phone. I'm fine, how are you? He mewed back in a higher pitched tone than he was accustomed to using. Why do you always do that every time you answer the phone? His mother asked, chuckling. Shaun frowned. Do what? He asked. You've been saying the same phrase for as long as I can remember. As long as I've moved out of the house, at least. I'm fine, how are you? It sounds like you're singing, she said with humor in her voice. Shaun was taken aback. She was absolutely right, but he hadn't noticed that he always answered her phone calls the same way. Shaun was usually actively aware of everything he did. He tried to rationalize it to her. I'm just happy to hear from you, my mother dearest, he said sweetly. Well, can we do without the singing? She asked. I don't like it. How about just a, hey, Mom, how's it going? Shaun scrunched his face. If that's what you like. I promise next time I answer the phone, I'll say in a really deep voice, hey, Mom, how's it going? His voice dropped an octave or two lower. His mother laughed. Shaun loved his mother's laugh. Both hers and Caleb's managed to always come out genuine and happy. That's better. Okay, so I called to find out how it's going with college. Did you file your financial aid in time and take care of everything? She asked. Well, kind of, Shaun said. I got the paperwork in, your divorce sheets and my signed letter of appeal. Now I'm just waiting to hear back from them. I already registered for a payment plan, Mother dearest, and Sanem, who I told you about, is sure I'll get a refund from the school after my appeal is granted. How are you so sure that your appeal is going to be granted? His mother asked, sounding concerned. I don't, Shaun laughed. Sanem is pretty sure. Apparently she deals with financial aid issues all the time. She seems pretty positive that I'm going to get the refund, and in my opinion, it's too late to worry about it now. Or too early, depending on how you look at it, Shaun said. Okay, his mother sighed. And this Sanem girl, is she your new girlfriend now? Shaun laughed at his mother's pronunciation. Not yet, Mother, but I do like her a lot. We're actually planning to go on a little mini vacation to LBI on our days off. I booked a hotel by the water. That sounds fun, his mother said. The airiness in her voice had left. Shaun rolled his eyes. I want you to meet her soon. I don't like how your voice sounds, he said jokingly. And Jess is completely out of the picture, she asked. Yes, Mom. I had to block her number 2 weeks ago. She wouldn't stop texting me, Shaun said. Okay, she paused for a moment, then said, It's a real shame. I really liked her, Shaun. I know you did, Mommy. I liked her too. But I'm sure you like this new one as well. She's quite smart and independent and all other kinds of ladylike stuff. I told you she's going to Rutgers Business School, right? You'll be surprised I bagged her. I'm sure I will, son, she said pleasantly. Okay, well, I won't keep you. Do you work today? Shaun smiled, wondering why she asked such superfluous questions. She lived 100 miles away. He could not understand how the relevance of him working on specific days applied to her. Yes, Mom, he drawled into the phone. She laughed again, wholeheartedly. Okay, I'm just checking. Okay, I'll talk to you soon, sweetheart. Have fun on your mini vacation. Shaun smiled brightly at the mention of the upcoming days. Love you, Mom. Love you too, son. Bye. Shaun put the phone back in his pocket at the same time Caleb was finally walking out the door. The young man walked calmly over to Shaun's car and opened the passenger side, getting in. Didn't I tell you my phone's broken? He asked in the monotone voice that Shaun had grown to enjoy. Perhaps, Shaun replied as he pulled out of the parking space. What of it? He asked back with a smirk. Well, my text messenger is broken. It doesn't notify me when someone texts me. I would have been out sooner if you had called, Caleb said. Yeah, that's cool. I would have called, but my dear mother wanted to bless me with her care and concern. Shaun looked at Caleb briefly. She called. He finished. Oh, that worked out well then. I was finishing reading anyway, Caleb said. Oh yeah? What were you reading? Shaun asked. European Culture and History, Caleb said. Shaun looked at Caleb out of the corner of his eye and quickly returned to driving. Caleb's face was sincere. Are you fucking with me? Shaun asked. I'm not fucking with you, Caleb said with a small smile spread across his lips. Fuck, you're weird, man, Shaun said, grinning. Caleb let out a laugh. I'm weird because I'm reading a history book. On your own fucking time? It's summer, so I know you're not doing it for no class. You're reading that shit for your leisure, Shaun said emphatically. And that's weird, I suppose, Caleb said more to himself than to Shaun. Hell fucking yes, Shaun said. Caleb chuckled. Whatever you say, man. Anyway, that's not what I want to talk about today, Shaun said. What is it you would like to talk about today? First off, when's the last time I fucking saw you? Was it my house? Shaun asked. Yeah, Caleb said simply. It was when you were high and almost instigated a fist fight between me and Chris. You should remember that. Shaun hit his driving wheel and exclaimed, Holy fuck! I've been wanting to talk to you about that for the past, 2 fucking weeks. Was that shit not incredible? I don't know how incredible it was, but it certainly was unfortunate that it had to happen, that is, Caleb said. So it wasn't just me that felt like something was about to go down. I texted Joe about it too. I thought I might have been imagining it, Shaun said excitedly. No, there was definite tension between me and him. Apparently I had messed up the natural pecking order of your little group, Caleb said. What do you mean by that? Where are we going, by the way? Caleb asked. Cosi, Shaun said promptly. Caleb cocked his head. Doesn't Chris work there? He asked. Yeah, Shaun said with a sheepish grin across his face. Caleb laughed again loudly. You are an asshole, man. You just want us two to fight, don't you? You're like Robert Downey Jr. in the Avengers. When he prods Bruce Banner with the electrical instrument? Shaun asked. Exactly, Caleb said. Only question is, who is the Hulk in this situation? Shaun asked. He slowly turned his head to look at Caleb. His eyebrows were raised and his eyes wide open, showing white on all sides. Caleb shook his head. And you call me the weird one. Try looking in the mirror. Shaun looked at his rearview mirror, staring into his own eyes. Then he looked at Caleb, who was watching. He looked back up at the rearview mirror and shrugged. Nothing wrong with that guy, Shaun said with a sly smirk. We're getting off topic here. You were talking about pecking orders. Right. I wasn't aware of the young folks' comedy social hierarchy. You guys throw sarcastic comments at each other left and right, but Chris sits at the top of the hill exempt from being the butt of anyone's joke, Caleb said. Shaun frowned at that. Caleb was right. Why do you think that is? Why is he at the top? Shaun asked. Caleb shrugged. Because he's the best looking, most physically impressive person in the group? I don't know why you guys have chosen him to be the one who never gets picked on. Shaun pouted. Who calls him the best looking member of YFC? Caleb laughed. Everyone does. Shaun scrunched his face inwards, bringing his lip up to the base of his nose. The faces you fucking make, man, Caleb said, shaking his head again. You said he had the most impressive body, Shaun whined. Listen, no one really cares about anything you have going on because you're black. I don't have to explain that to you. You already know, Caleb said. You could be the best looking, tallest, best built, but as long as you're black, you don't stand a chance against Chris. Plus your voice is too high to be taken seriously, Caleb grinned and pat Shaun on the back. You know, Caleb, you give a new meaning to the phrase brutally honest, Shaun said in a sad, defeated voice. I get that a lot. I do it to get people to stop asking my opinion of them. Though the people who ask in the first place are usually the same people who never stop asking no matter what you tell them, Caleb finished. And I'm one of those people? Shaun asked. Don't feel too bad about it. It's not the end of the world. You just happen to care about what people think of you. Like most insecure people. Caleb said that with a huge smile on his face. Fuck you, Shaun said. So how are you and the Persian doing? Did you better yet? Caleb asked. I did. I most certainly did. It felt good. Bit sooner than I anticipated, which kind of disappointed me in a way, Shaun said. Caleb chuckled. What did you want her to hold out on you or something? Yes, in fact. I was looking forward to it. I fucked her like a week ago or something. 2 weeks after our first kiss. That's typical girl shit, at least for me. Fucking legs took longer than that, and that's the sad part. She was 3 weeks, Shaun said. I empathize with you. Still, you kind of sound like a baby crying over nothing, all things considered, Caleb said. Don't get me fucking wrong. I'm happy to not have to worry about the next time I'm having sex, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm still a little disappointed by the whole thing. And she told me she was a virgin, too, which makes things even weirder if you ask me. Caleb raised his eyebrows. So she was a virgin. You guessed it correctly. Good for you. Yeah, I guess, Shaun said solemnly. I've never seen a guy so unhappy about taking a girl's virginity. You are a strange man. I suppose you're right, Shaun said. Kosi loomed in front of them. He pulled off the route and sped into the plaza. He parked quickly and opened the door to get out. The two stood up. Shaun yawned obnoxiously. Listen, he said. I chose Kosi because I wanted Kosi. I used to work here and I'm craving their sandwiches. The fact that your nemesis works here is just icing. I don't want any problems, understand? Shaun looked at Caleb with his sternest expression. Fucking nemesis. I hate when people use that word, especially in superhero movies. No one seems to understand that a hero literally cannot defeat their nemesis. The definition states that a nemesis is unconquerable. But I'm just the guy with the genius level IQ, right? Caleb asked sarcastically. Shaun reached for the door and held it open for Caleb. Just try to keep it in your pants, okay? Christopher. Christopher saw Shaun and Caleb before they saw him. They walked down the narrow passage up to the cash register. Chris smiled from his little spot at the bakery. He looked over his glass border and yelled, "What the hell are you two doing here?" Shaun's head snapped in Chris's direction. He grinned widely and walked over to Chris. "Howdy, Christopher," Shaun said. "What's up, man? You came to eat?" Chris asked. "Yeah, I was craving a pesto chicken melt," he said. "Fucking love those. I still put pepperonis in mine after you started doing it," Chris said with a smile. "Hey, man," Caleb said politely. "Since when the fuck did you two start hanging out on your own?" Chris asked. "Caleb's going to be my new best friend in a couple of weeks. Richie can't have him all to himself," Shaun said, slinging his arm around Caleb. "How do you feel about that, Caleb?" Chris asked, grinning. "I feel great," Caleb said sarcastically. "Just great." "All right, well, you didn't come here for me. We'll have to shoot the shit some other time," Chris said. "Word. We gotta get another hangout session in," Shaun said, extending his fist for a pound. Chris met Shaun's fist with his own and nodded his head. "Yeah, man, just hit me up. I get out at 2 mostly every day now. I'm actually finishing up for the day." "Sounds good, bro. We'll speak soon," Shaun said and walked away. "Later, man," Caleb said. Chris nodded after the two and returned to his work. He would have been done if not for the fact that the other Chris called out. Despite that, Chris took comfort in the knowledge that he'd be smoking a nice big blunt within the hour. He worked quickly, slicing the bread and stacking it in neat little corners on the counter. He hadn't realized how efficient he was at the job until he had gotten promoted to head baker. At the end of the day, Chris truly did deserve it. Though he didn't do it intentionally. He had just gotten his second paycheck that included the increase that day. He had spent 2/3 of the last one on weed. He tried to rationalize it as a form of celebration, but that justification wouldn't work if he did the same with the new check. Still, Chris was making $420 a week. He couldn't save all of it. That was justification enough. He felt guilty when Joe would bring up the Cali dream, but that was scarce enough not to bother him. Chris looked over at Shaun and Caleb. They were sitting at a far corner in the nice, comfy chairs that Kosi was so popular for. Shaun was leaning towards Caleb as if he was telling him a secret. Chris found that humorous. Shaun was truly a character. He heard the door open and the sound of another customer's feet. He looked up. Another fucking character. Chris smirked and looked at his old middle school friend, Dennis the Menace. "What?" Dennis exclaimed at the top of his lungs. "Christopher D'Angelo is in the building? What?" Dennis had always been loud. Chris smiled and greeted him. "Dennis the Menace. What's up, man? What have you been up to?" Chris asked. Dennis walked up to him. A glass wall separated the two of them, stopping at the neck. Dennis lowered his voice and said, "Yo, I'm on that job circuit, filling out applications and whatnot. I'm going to Pancheros after this. You trying to hook me up here, man? What's it like? You feeling it?" Dennis asked. "Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's a job. The hours are good to me. I just got promoted, so I'm in here 5 to 6 days a week. I mean, I'm not bitching about it," Chris said with a laid-back smile. "But yeah, I like it." "Yo, hook me up, dog. I gotta start making money. School's coming up and my mom's is like only paying half of my tuition," Dennis said. "You're going back to school, man? Good for you," Chris said. Yeah, I figured I might as well make the mom happy while I'm waiting for this rap shit to take off, Dennis said. You're still rapping? Chris asked. Hell yeah, nigga. What you mean am I still rapping? Yo, I'm putting the finishing touches on my mixtape this week. You better peep that shit, Dennis said. All right. Hit me up when it comes out, Chris said with a small shrug. He smiled easily at Dennis. He had always liked the kid, in small doses. What you been up to besides work? You in school? Dennis asked. Least favorite question of my fucking life, Chris thought to himself. I'm working on it. I think spring semester I'm going back, Chris lied. I feel you. But yo, I'm about to fill out this application real quick. Yo, what you doing later? I just got a new dosage from my Jamaican cousin. You trying to blaze? Dennis asked. Chris looked around to see if Danny was around. He wasn't. That actually sounds like a great idea. Can I hit you up in an hour? Chris asked. Yeah, nigga. Talk to your manager for me, Dennis said, stepping away, looking for an application on the counter across from them. A thought crept into Christopher's head that made him grin. Yo, Dennis, he called after him. Dennis turned around. What up? He said. Make sure you say hi to Shaun. He's over in the corner, Chris said as his grin spread even wider. Oh, word? Shaun's here? Dennis looked into the lounge area, searching for Shaun. Not long after he spotted him. Yo! Fucking Shaun the Hunter! Shaun the Huntmaster! Dennis yelled across the entire room. Chris was glad there was no customers besides Shaun and Caleb. He wished he could get a better look at Shaun's face when Dennis approached him, but he never wore his glasses to work. Shaun had disliked Dennis ever since he had tried to hook up with his ex-girlfriend Jess. He had yet to forgive him. Chris found the whole thing very humorous. Greg approached him from the rear and spoke quietly in his ear creepily. That guy a friend of yours? He asked in a whisper. He had to stand on his toes for his mouth to reach Chris's ear. Chris shook his head and laughed. He's not one of my closest friends, but I still see him from time to time. He's not Shaun, if that's what you're asking, Chris said. Yeah, I spoke to Shaun. He doesn't want his job back for some reason. I'm kind of offended. Chris looked down at the short man and tried to look amused. Dennis is applying here. Chris nodded towards the menace. Yeah? You want to vouch for him? He a good worker? Greg asked, folding his tiny little arms across his chest. Chris looked at Shaun's wide fake smile as he interacted with Dennis. Dennis had sat down next to Shaun, which made everything that much funnier. He could almost feel the anger emanating from him. He chuckled to himself and looked at Greg. Nah, I don't think I'm going to vouch for him. Definitely not as good a worker. Definitely not as a good worker, he said with a smile. Great pot dealer, though, Chris thought. Very reliable. Chris followed Dennis down his driveway to the big blue minivan he was so notorious for driving. Fucking mom is throwing a bitch fit, so we have to blaze in here, Dennis said, annoyed. I've never been a picky smoker, Chris said. He was still in his work clothes. I got a surprise for you, Dennis said as he trotted ahead of Chris and grabbed the sliding door. Yeah? I love surprises, Chris said. Dennis slid the door open, revealing someone already sitting in the minivan. Chris instantly recognized the person. MC Green on the phone, Chris explained. The local legend, MC Green laughed. Get out of here with that. You're the legend, man. I'm fucking honored, Chris said sincerely as he walked over to take MC Green's hand in greeting. This is a good surprise, Chris said to Dennis. Shit, you telling me the menace hyped me up that much? MC Green said, smiling. Nah, man, I told you though. Every time I see the boy, Chris always be giving you mad props on the mic, Dennis said, stepping into the van. Chris followed after. MC Green held a large 40-ounce bottle of cast malt liquor. It was manufactured by a local liquor company. Chris shook his head. You live what you rap about. I like that, Chris said, nodding towards the bottle. Shit, you heard that song? MC Green asked modestly. Chris had never seen MC Green in person, but had been listening to him for well over a year. He was to rap what Young Folks Comedy was to film entertainment. As YFC started to quiet down on the internet in regards to the quantity of videos they posted monthly, MC Green got louder and louder. He had around 15 rap music videos filming around the web. Dude, we get high and play your shit, man, Chris said. Yo, don't tell me Young Folks Comedy knows who I am. MC Green teetered on his seat. Dennis had already pulled out the prepared blunt and was lighting it. They do. On behalf of them, I will tell you that we are all very big fans, Chris said. Yo, that's dope, bro. I've been watching you guys since I was like a junior in high school, man. You guys inspired me to start putting shit up on the internet. What? We inspired you? Fucking Joey's going to love hearing that, Chris said. That'll make his head explode. Dennis passed the blunt to Chris, who accepted it graciously. He took a long draw from it, inhaling the weed. He held it in for a minute and then breathed out slowly. He smiled. It was his first It was his first of the day. His new schedule had screwed his weed routine up. He was finally getting into the new rhythm of things. Waiting until 3 or 4 every day had started out tough, but now Chris learned to look forward to it as something he would do immediately after clocking out. Fucking Tiger Boy has got to be my favorite one, man. And Leo Rap. Them shits was hilarious, bro, MC Green said. Chris nodded his head in affirmation as he took another draw and passed it to MC Green. He took the blunt and passed it back to Dennis the Menace. I'm not smoking for a while. This job I'm applying for is putting me through a drug test. That's why I bought the grass. MC Green explained, holding up his bottle. It was already half empty. I can dig that, Chris said. He could feel the weed already taking effect. It was working into his joints. His fingers and toes slightly tingled. He sat back into the car seat and put his head back. Chris was at ease. What job are you applying for? Chris asked. Construction. It's pretty killer money. Plus you get health insurance, weekends off and vacations, MC Green said. Can't hit the piff, though, Dennis said, taking a long draw from the blunt. Chris laughed at that and accepted the blunt as it was passed back to him. So are you guys still making stuff or what? I haven't seen anything new in a while, MC Green said to Chris. We're too busy enjoying your shit to make our own, Chris said jokingly. Yeah, right. Thanks so, man. Seriously, though, you guys were good. You should get back in it, MC Green said sincerely. Chris nodded his head. The next line of dialogue came out of his mouth naturally. He had been using this excuse for the past year whenever the conversation went down this path. Well, the plan is for all of us to save up and move to Cali and actually try to do shit there. Joey was making plans to go this time next summer, Chris said. Yo, that'd be fucking dope if y'all moved to LA. They wouldn't be ready for y'all. You'd fucking get big in a year, I bet, Dennis said excitedly. Chris tried not to think of it. He had been successful at forgetting that dream for the most part. Now only hurt a little bit when someone else brought it up. It only went down to a certain point. He would come out of this conversation unscathed for the most part, he knew. The weed helps, Chris thought. You still rapping at least? MC Green asked. Yeah, whatever happened to Apparatus Records? That shit was tight, Dennis said. Chris thought silently in his head. It was why Chris smoked alone for the most part. It was Chris's own fault for accepting the invitation, he supposed. He had just been anxious to get out of work. Me and my brother record on a regular basis. It's just too much of a hassle to upload it into Facebook. You have to condense it to like a certain format and shit. It's annoying. I'm sure you two understand, Chris said. Better than you know, bro. Better than you know, MC Green said. He lifted the bottle towards Chris as a form of salutations and took a long swig from it. Chris waited for more questions. More of the interrogation, he thought. He smirked. It was what his dad had always called questions directed towards him. Interrogations. Chris figured it had something to do with the fact that he had been a prosecutor for 15 years of his life. I guess he brought his work home. The three sat in the minivan for another 2 hours talking about the things they had in common. Their old high school, the rap game, and working at shitty jobs. All in all, Chris had a pretty good time, as he normally did whenever he got high. On his way home, Chris noticed the street he was on and looked around for another friend. Sam was there, sitting on his front porch right at the corner of Pine Street and Locust. Chris stopped momentarily at the corner and rolled out the window. I thought I'd find you here, man, Chris said. What's up, man? What you been up to? Sam asked, his deep voice booming across the street. I just smoked weed with Dennis the Menace and MC Green on the phone, Chris said. Sam laughed. Those two clowns? Yeah, didn't think you'd want that invite, Chris said lazily. Yo, you know who I'd been wanting to see for a while? Shaun. I miss that guy, man. He's a funny dude, Sam said. He smokes weed, Chris said. Does he? Hit him up for me. I don't think I have his number anymore, Sam said. Will do. I know his work schedule is just as busy as mine, but I'm sure I can set something up, Chris said. All right, bro. Just let me know, Sam replied. Chris nodded at Sam and drove off. I gotta hand it to you, man. I never thought you'd make this place look habitable, Sam said, looking around the interior of Shaun's newly cleaned living room. No offense, Sam, but I don't even remember you being up here, Shaun said with a smile. I was, bro. Big time. Like the first week you moved in, I was at the homecoming party, Sam said. He passed the joint to Christopher. Yeah, we definitely didn't have a homecoming party, Shaun said, scratching his head. Fuck, man, I was here. I was fucking here. I don't care if you don't believe me, Sam yelled. Christopher laughed at the two of them and sat back in Shaun's armchair. Yo, Shaun, It's a shame you going to the shore this weekend. Me and Joey are bringing the females down to Towson. Kate is going down there early before all her roommates get there. It'll be a banger, Chris said. A banger consisting of 4 people, Shaun asked, smiling. A banger consisting of weed, beer, and shots of tequila, Chris yelled. Shaun laughed. No, seriously, that sounds like a dope experience. Too bad the hotel is already booked. I remember when I used to spend money on my bitch. I'm glad those days are over, Sam said. The weed had gotten back to him. He inhaled it. Shaun stood up and walked into his small room. Chris heard him rummaging through his drawers. Sam got up and followed him in. Chris stayed stationary. Did I invite you in here? I was coming right out, Shaun said. Chris could hear them clearly from where he sat. Holy fuck! Chris, you gotta come see this, Sam yelled excitedly. Chris groaned. He did not want to get up. What is it? He asked. Shaun bought Rosetta Stone for the Persian, Sam said, poking his head back into the other room to look at Chris. Wait, I thought she already knew how to speak English, Chris said, confused. Shaun entered the room with 3 Xbox 360 game cases. He handed them to Chris. I bought it for myself to learn Persian, Shaun said, sitting down in the adjacent armchair. You keep leaving your empty game cases here. You're going to run out pretty soon. Damn, Shaun. How long have you even known this chick? Sam asked, laughing. I've been dating her for a little over a month now, Shaun said stiffly. Damn, that sucks. You just wasted your fucking money. How much was it? Sam asked. $175, Shaun said. Sam shook his head in an exaggerated manner. You're never going to get that money back. Never. And you're never going to learn Persian either. And just think, even if you did learn to speak Persian, how useless will that be when the next girl you fuck is American? Sam asked. Shaun had nothing to say to that. Chris knew his friend well enough to understand what he was thinking. He most likely wanted to stand up for himself, but at the same time, Shaun hated conflict. And when dealing with a person like Sam, conflict was always a possibility. Chris decided to come to his aid. I think that's kind of cool, man. I've always wanted to learn another language. Is it working? Chris asked. Yeah, it is actually. I only got it last week, but I've been fucking with it in the daytime before I go to work. I got the colors down, the numbers, and the days of the week. I've always been pretty good at memorizing shit, Shaun said, shrugging. Is this new chick even going to come with you? Is this new chick even going to come with you guys to California? Have you even thought about that? Sam asked, looking at Shaun. Chris and Shaun exchanged a look with each other. Their eyes met briefly, but Shaun quickly looked away. In that short span of time, Chris saw shame staring back at him. All I know is I plan on finally getting my goddamn associate's degree. That's at least another year, if not more. I'm not planning anything past that, Shaun said quietly. Chris admired that. Sam shook his head again. His deep voice came out sullen. That's a fucking mistake, man. You're fucking settling just like the rest of these fuckers that live here. What the fuck do you think you're going to do with an associate's? Sam asked. Get a bachelor's afterwards? Shaun asked sarcastically. Sam shrugged. Fucking a bachelor's in psychology? Good for you, man. I hope you can live like a happy life with that. Like, seriously, I hope you and the Persian get married and the choices you make don't haunt you for the rest of your life. His voice sounded almost hurt. Shaun sat there quietly, lost in his own thoughts. Chris looked down at his feet. He was high and the same thing was happening again. Chris tried to salvage what was left of the good energy that was quickly dissipating from the room. So, Shaun, you got any snacks downstairs or what? Chris asked. Shaun looked up at Chris. It took a second for his eyes to come into focus. Chris could not guess where his mind had been. Finally, Shaun gave a slight smile. I got snacks galore, he said. Chris sat in the passenger seat as Kate drove down the New Jersey Turnpike. His head was leaned up against the headrest and it swayed with the motion of the car. His eyes were closed. The sound of Slaughterhouse bumped through the speakers of his girlfriend's car. Kate rested a hand on his knee lightly. Chris opened his eyes slightly. What kind of beer did you get? He asked. I got a 30-pack of Miller Lite, Kate said as she kept her eyes on the road. Chris turned around. Joey's car was directly behind him. He could see the couple interact with each other. Jennifer was doing most of the talking, while Joe looked straight ahead. He was behind the wheel. Chris turned back to face the front and returned to his previous comfortable position. This is a very pleasant drive, Chris thought. He thought about the activities he'd soon be participating in and grew even happier. His phone vibrated. It was a text from Joe. We should have let the females drive in one car and us in the other, the text read. Chris chuckled softly. He turned around briefly to get a good look at Joe. He didn't look all that miserable, but then again, when it came to Joe, it was sometimes hard to tell what he was feeling. Chris laughed to himself again. "What is it?" Kate asked. "Just something Joey texted," Chris replied. "Oh, was it about Jennifer?" Kate asked. "He wanted to have you two drive together and have me in his car," Chris said, smiling. "Thank God that didn't happen," Kate said under her breath. Chris raised an eyebrow. "I'm getting this impression that you don't like Joe's new girl?" he said jokingly. "It's not that I don't like her, I had just gotten really close to his last girlfriend, Kirsten. I hate making new friends, that's all. I'm sure she's nice," Kate said sweetly. Chris laughed lightly at that. "I'm sure she is too." Kate drove in silence for some time, then added in a very low whisper, "He kind of downgraded from Kirsten in my opinion." Chris's jaw dropped at the comment. "Is that something negative I hear coming out of your mouth?" Chris asked as he laughed openly. "What? I'm just saying she's nowhere near as pretty as Kirsten. I'm not the only one thinking it." "Don't tell Joe," Kate pleaded. Chris shook his head in awe of his girlfriend. Kate rarely said bad things about people. She was always optimistic in spirit. He remembered how much she had hated Shaun's old girlfriend, Jess. He never really understood why. He never saw a problem with her. She must really dislike Jennifer, he thought. Granted, she is being quite accurate. "Yeah, she's definitely not the most attractive girl I've ever seen," Chris said, chuckling. "That's kind of an understatement," Kate said. He continued laughing as he texted Joe back. "I hope you can survive another 2 hours. Joseph." Joe read the text and hid his slight grimace from Jennifer's view. He put his phone in his pocket and focused on driving. Jennifer had fallen silent. She had finished talking about how excited she was for the upcoming semester and the successful expulsion of her and her sister's sloppy roommate. In the 45 minutes that they had been driving, Jennifer had managed to cover every aspect of her life, down to a verbal reminder to herself about picking up more toothpaste from CVS. She was finally done, and the car was quiet. Joe decided it was a good opportunity to play some music. He turned his stereo on and hit the CD button. Immediately, Radiohead's Kid A album started playing from track 1. Joseph listened for a minute to the beginning of one of his all-time favorite albums. The slow, quiet start of everything in its right place brought memories to Joe's vision of the first time he had played the album. He was much younger then. He remembered his father had introduced him to the band. "Why do you always listen to such depressing music?" Jennifer asked, interrupting Joe's train of thought. He looked at her and hid disgust from his face. He put one hand to the stereo and turned the music down slightly. He nodded in Christopher's direction and asked, "What do you think they're talking about in their car? Anything interesting?" Joe asked, changing the subject. Jennifer thought about it. "I don't know. Chris is probably talking about work, and Kate is probably talking about how it's her last year at Towson," she said. Joe nodded his head. "Both good assumptions. But you know what they say about assuming." "You're the one who asked," Jennifer snapped at Joe. He laughed it off. "You gonna give me a back scratch later? In the midst of all the alcohol and games, do you think you could find it in your heart to give the bull a back scratch?" Joe asked. Jennifer laughed and looked at him out of the corner of her eyes. "Yes, Joe. I'm pretty sure I can fit that into my busy schedule," she said with a smile. "All right. Now give the bull a kiss." Joe tapped his cheek with his finger, indicating where he wanted her kiss. Jennifer leaned over and planted a soft kiss on his right cheek. "By the way," Joe added, "I want you to know now and not later that Chris and I are going to be smoking weed later on. Don't get me wrong, I'm not asking for permission. I just don't want you to freak out when we start doing it." Jennifer looked at Joe for a long time, deciding what to say. "I just don't understand why you like it so much," she said finally. "I don't like it that much. I only smoke when I hang out with Chris, and in case you haven't noticed, that isn't very often. Secondly, if you want to know why I do it at all, I won't stop you from trying it." "No, thank you," Jennifer said, annoyed. "Okay, I'm just letting you know now, so you don't call the cops when Chris pulls it out or something," Joe finished. Jennifer glared at him. "Whatever, Joe," she said. The rest of the car ride went uninterrupted for the most part. Joe gave Jennifer control of the conversation. He took care to steer her away from broaching the subject of weed again. It was something he had no interest in discussing further. He was aware of the stigma weed had on sheltered Catholic girls like Jennifer, and was convinced that an argument about the topic would not solve anything, so he just let it go. Joe spent most of the car ride looking forward to the socializing he would get from Chris, his closest friend. The weed was just a plus. 2 hours later, they arrived in Towson and pulled into a parking spot beside Chris and Kate. Joe was the first to get out. He stretched out his cramping legs as he shut the car door behind him. It was 3 p.m. Chris got out of the car and nodded to Joseph. Joe inched over to him and said in a low voice, "So we hitting that Dutch before or after the beer?" Chris shrugged. I mean, we could do it before. We can do it after. We can do it before and after. It's a party. It's a party. That's what parties are about, Chris said, jumping up and down to get better circulation. Long car rides, right? Christopher. Chris stored the pack of Miller Lite in Kate's fridge and took a seat on the nearest sofa. Joe and Jennifer had already made themselves comfortable on the adjacent one. Kate returned from the bathroom and sat down next to Chris. Look at us, just 4 friends about to have a good time, Joe said. Are we starting with shots or do you guys want some beer? Kate asked. I say we start the night off right with a shot, then move on to a beer, Chris said. And then finish it off with some piff? Joe said under his breath. Chris noticed the subtle look Jennifer gave Joe after the comment. It was a look of condescension and disdain. Chris chose to ignore it and went to the freezer to retrieve the tequila. Next he got the shot glasses out of the cabinet and poured for 4. The other 3 stood up and gathered around the kitchen counter, each taking their own shot glass. To love and happiness, Joseph said, smirking. Kate chimed in, to love and happiness. The 4 drank their shots and slammed the glasses back on the counter. The 4 proceeded with the planned festivities. Chris and the group participated in the various drinking games Kate had learned during her 3 years at Towson. Chris enjoyed himself as he knew he would. 8 o'clock came quickly. Chris was at a great spot in terms of drunkenness. He had had 3 shots and 4 beers altogether. Chris sat on the floor with his head against the couch. The last game of Kings had just ended. Joe was trying to get his attention. So, you trying to hit that Dutch now, or Joe asked in typical Joe fashion. Chris laughed. He had been waiting for Joe to mention it. Chris always found it humorous that whenever he hung out with Joseph, he would always be the one to mention smoking weed first. Chris shrugged and got up and went over to his bag. He procured an empty Xbox 360 case. The title of the game read, Borderlands 2. Kate watched him inside. Chris felt for her. She hadn't known how often he smoked weed during her time in Towson last year. When she came back home for the summer, she was introduced rather abruptly to Chris's new hobby. He did his best to make it look casual, like he only did on occasion, but Kate was not a dumb girl. She saw how he never ran out of it, and how quickly he was to smoke again at a moment's notice. He did his best to ignore her. He knew that it didn't hurt anybody. He hated the social taboo he was given. He tried to proceed without shame. Chris sat down in the corner of the room at the kitchen table and opened the game case. Inside were his tools. He grabbed the Dutch and tore the purple wrapping open. The first thing he had to do was gut the Dutch of all the tobacco. Joe had gotten up and went over to sit next to Chris as he worked. Joe leaned back in the chair and put his feet up on the table. Kate began collecting the empty beer cans. Jennifer walked over and tried sitting in Joe's lap. Can't you see I'm leaning here? Joe asked irritably. Jennifer took the seat next to him. She started staring at Chris, a look of wonder across her face. So you know exactly what you're doing? Jennifer asked. Chris looked up at her. She was sitting directly across from him. Her face was angled downward, looking at the weed and other contents of the case. He replied politely, Well, I've done it once or twice, and I happen to be blessed with the same skill that monkeys have, Monkey see, monkey do. He focused on breaking the weed up into smaller pieces. So you have a supplier, like a drug dealer? Jennifer asked. Chris shrugged. I guess you could say that. Sometimes as I go throughout my daily routine, there might be someone who is just trying to get it off their hands, so I just help them out with that. So you actually know drug dealers? She asked. I can't really tell you my sources, Chris said. He was doing his best to brush off the questions, but the interaction was starting to slightly annoy him. How about questions after he's done? You're distracting the maestro, Joe said irritably. Jennifer crossed her arms and looked warily at the weed as if it were going to come across the table and attack her. Kate, being the wonderful girlfriend that she was, swooped in for the rescue. Jennifer, do you want to help me tidy up in the kitchen? She asked. Chris loved that girl. As much as she disagreed with his habit, she helped him whenever she saw he needed it. Jennifer stood up and headed into the kitchen. Chris and Joe made eye contact. Joe rolled his eyes when Jennifer passed behind Chris. The friends laughed together, understanding what the other was thinking. I had wanted Shaun and his new chick to come, but he had already made other plans, Chris said as he rolled the weed into the Dutch. From what he's told me, she's kind of a bitch. She probably wouldn't mesh well with the group, Joe said. Chris licked the end of the Dutch and rolled it back and forth across the table. You might be right, he said. I keep telling Chris I want to meet her, Kate said. I actually know someone from Persia, and she's definitely not a bitch. Maybe just a little stuck up. Just a little, though. Does Richard ever have a girlfriend? Jennifer asked. Joe laughed at the question. Shaun's his girlfriend, Joe said. Chris chuckled at that. Yeah, they used to be pretty inseparable, he said. But what about girls? Why doesn't he have a girlfriend? Jennifer asked again. In my opinion, he just has a hard time getting along with them, which is something I can understand, Chris said. And just what is that supposed to mean? Kate asked jokingly. Joe spoke before Chris could reply to her. Who knows what's wrong with him? Maybe he'll find a girl in New York, Joe said. Why New York? Chris asked, slightly confused. The Dutch was finally complete. He grabbed his lighter and ran the flame along the length of the shaft, singeing the edges together. Then he put it in his mouth and lit it. So he didn't tell you either? Richard got accepted into a college in New York, Joe said, sounding bitter. What? Chris said, surprised. When did this happen? Joe snorted. I have no fucking clue. I had to find out about it on Facebook. I got a notification saying that Richard changed his location to New York. Then I texted him about it, and he told me he got accepted to the new school. Joe emphasized the college's name with bunny ears. Chris passed the Dutch over to Joe. He was shocked at the new information. That's fucking crazy. Did he move in already? Chris asked. Pretty sure. I'm just going to say this. Kind of fucked up they didn't tell anybody, Joe said. Maybe he doesn't like you guys anymore. Maybe he smoked too much weed for him, Jennifer said. Joe looked as if he was shocked that Jennifer thought she could include herself on the conversation. Chris thought about what she said. He had noticed that Richard had stopped taking part in smoking weed some time ago. He had thought it was odd at first, but after further contemplation realized it was around the same time that he started hanging out with Caleb. Something clicked in Chris's head. Caleb probably knew, he said out loud, though he didn't necessarily mean to. Most likely, Joseph agreed. Why would I not know? That'd be as ridiculous as not knowing that the earth is covered 70% with water, 53.5% of that being salt water, and the other 22.5% fresh. His voice came out nasally and nerdy. Chris laughed. He took that to be an impersonation of Caleb, though it didn't sound very much like him. He had gotten the pretentiousness down at least. Who's Caleb? Jennifer asked. Richard's new best friend, Joe replied. Has he taken Shaun's title yet? Chris pondered. Definitely, without a doubt. Rich traded up. I don't even think Shaun knows it yet, Joe said. Chris detected more bitterness from his voice. Well, I've got to congratulate him, Chris said as he took his phone out. Yeah, I told him good job yesterday when I found out, Joe said. Crazy that he didn't tell us, Chris said to the room at large as he texted his friend. Somebody told me a congratulations was in order. That somebody wasn't you somehow, but I'm sending it your way regardless. Congrats on getting accepted, bro, Chris sent the text. Chris hardly had time to put his phone down before Richard texted him back. Thanks, the text read. It all happened really fast. I got accepted like 3 weeks ago. I just moved into my dorm today. Chris looked at Joe. He says he just moved in today. He looked back at the text message, reading it again. Shit, man, this is crazy. I just saw him like a couple weeks ago. You're talking about him like he's been dying for 2 months and didn't tell you until after he died. All he did was move to New York, Jennifer said, irritated. Chris and Joe both chose to ignore her. Chris shook his head. He texted Rich again. Richard Casimo, the New Yorker boy. Make some memories, man. I'm happy for you.